Hello everyone, my name is Avatar Ken, and today we'll be analyzing Aang's wins and losses across Book 1 of Avatar. Now before we get started, I'll go over some rules. 1. The Avatar state does not count. 2. Individual grunts do not count. And 3. The opponent must be defeated and Aang's goal must be completed. This applies to Aang's opponents as well. Aang gets in some pretty good licks, but he is ultimately captured, so I'm counting this as a loss. Yeah, I'm counting everything that Aang does on this ship as a win. This includes him fighting with the guards, his fight against Zuko, and also him deflecting the fire blast at the end. So this is a definite win. Technically, with the Kyoshi warriors, this was a sneak attack, but Aang was still captured and ambushed, so I'm counting this as a loss. I don't consider the Yanagi to be a combatant, and Aang was not really trying to fight it, so I don't count this as a fight. Man, Zuko really cannot catch a break whenever he's fighting Aang, especially in Book 1, so this is definitely a win. Now, Aang versus Bumi is a very interesting case. They did technically fight to a draw, and Bumi did technically give up and or concede the fight, so I'm counting this as a victory. Aang did technically aid in the fight against the Fire Nation by giving them the coal, and he did do a cool air machine gun thing, so I will count this since he was technically on the winning side and he was participating in the battle. Alright, so Aang gets absolutely ragdolled by Heibai, and he ends up losing Sokka, so this is a definite loss. Alright, so with Heibai round 2, I'm gonna give Aang the win, and this is why. Aang did successfully pacify Heibai, and he did successfully save the village and get Sokka back, so I'm counting that as a win because he achieved his goals, even though he didn't really fight. So with the Fire Nation blockade, Aang does successfully dodge and or intercept all of the flaming projectiles, and they all make it into the Fire Nation, so this is a definite win for Aang. Okay, so the ordeal with the Fire Sages is an interesting case, but Aang did technically elude their capture and did elude when Zuko captured him in the end, and he also made it to Roku, which was his only goal, so I will technically count this as a win. And yeah, this is technically Avatar Roku performing all of these actions right here, so I cannot count this as a win for Aang. So with the fight with the pirates, initially, Aang and the gang do get away, so I'm counting that as an Aang win. With the pirate capture in the woods, yeah, this is a really brief skirmish, but Aang and Sokka are promptly captured by the pirates, so this is a definite loss. Aang also manages to escape from Zuko and the rest of the pirates once again, so that's another win. Even though it wasn't just Aang and the gang fighting this camp of Fire Nation soldiers, Jet and them ended up prevailing in the end, so I'm counting this as an Aang victory. With the Jet versus Aang fight, it is clear that Aang is definitely holding back a little bit with Jet, but he ultimately does fail to stop Jet, so I'm counting this as an Aang loss. Now, I know I said I wouldn't count any grunts, but technically the canyon crawlers are the main antagonists of the episode. If you don't count the annoying tribespeople, then Aang ends up besting them, so I'm counting this as an Aang win. So in the beginning of the Blue Spirit, Aang does get captured pretty handily by the Yuyan archers, so that is a definite Aang loss. Later on in the episode, after Zuko, the Blue Spirit, frees Aang, him and the Blue Spirit do manage to get outside of the stronghold, so I'm counting this as another win for Aang. As a side note, at the end of the Blue Spirit, Zuko does technically firebend at Aang, but I don't count this because Aang had no objective here with Zuko, and he gets away. Also, similar to the Unagi, I will not be counting Aang stopping the volcano as a win, as he is not technically fighting a living thing, so that I'm not counting that. Aang versus Zuko in this episode is extremely underrated, and this is an underrated episode in general in my opinion. But Aang and Zuko's fight was very even, but eventually Aang did end up defeating Zuko, and he got Katara's necklace back, so I'm counting that as a win for Aang. Aang versus Zhao will be the first example of something I will refer to as a mental win, because technically Aang never throws a single blow at Zhao, but he did manage to get Zhao to stop fighting because Zhao basically defeated himself. So I'm giving Aang the W on this one too. The Northern Air Temple battle is a no-brainer. Aang gets the W for this because he took out many soldiers and he was on the winning side, so W for Aang. So the book 1 finale was extremely tricky, but this is what I ultimately came to. Aang doesn't have any fights in the waterbending masters, so I can't really count anything he does there. Also, I will not count him taking out any of those ships in the Fire Navy fleet because he hardly put a dent in the overall fleet. And then when Aang is transformed into Koizilla, I also can't count that because he isn't technically in control of himself. Also, there's another weird thing where technically Aang does get captured by Zuko, but it's not his fault. That's actually Katara's fault. But he does wake up and he does technically fail to get away from Zuko, but that encounter was interrupted by Katara, so I can't count that either. The one thing that I will count is when Aang is in the spirit world, he has sort of like a mental battle with Ko the Space Stealer, and he does not lose his faith, and he does contribute to the war effort, so he's getting a win because the Northern Water Tribe did technically survive the battle. There were a total of 22 fights that were eligible for review according to my rules. Aang won 16 of them and lost 6 of them, giving him a win percentage of roughly 73% and 27% respectively for Book 1 of Avatar.